Hello and welcome to episode 8 of the MotoGP-Xtra podcast, the Italian Grand Prix. Joining me as usual to discuss the events of the weekend is Dylan, aka Dill469. So probably one of the biggest things that happened in the weekend was pretty early on. It was on Friday in the Moto3 practice session, and it was a pretty scary crash involving Ayumu Sasaki and Yama Masia. Sasaki was a pretty innocuous crash, really. I mean, it was kind of aggressive. He sort of slid off the bike coming out of Corintaya, but then unfortunately Masia was right behind him, unable to avoid Sasaki, and ran straight over him, and it was a pretty scary incident, wasn't it, Dill?
Yeah, a year on from losing the poor Jason DePasquier, and we had another pretty scary crash in FP2 on Friday. Thankfully, he is okay. Now, I say he's okay. He has damage to vertebrae. Both collarbones are broken, and he has some severe neck pain and headaches. But if you haven't seen the crash, he got off lucky with them injuries, really. He got hit into the neck. He was knocked unconscious. Coming out of that corner, even on a Moto3 bike, it's well over 100 miles an hour. A lot of riders did complain over the weekend. That corner, especially Corintaya, especially the exit, as you change direction into Biandetti 1, just inherent lack of grip. Something maybe the organisers and track management need to look into in the future. Just apparently a lot of people had issues with it there, especially the Moto3 boys, so something to do with maybe Dunlop rubber. But it was just heart-stopping. Again, the world feed did not do themselves any favours. They were showing the replays, showing riders unconscious. Like I mentioned, a year on from losing Jason DePasquier, and it's clear they have not learned anything at all. It's a tragedy. Like, it's not something that should be advertised or used for clicks, and it feels like the world feed kind of nearly pushes it forward. It's the same when we had the big crash with Alberto Sora in Texas. Straight away we didn't know his condition. They always jump the gun with all riders conscious, when they even did that during the Pasquier, which was obviously unfortunately untrue, and to this day they're still doing it. So I don't know how it's going to change, because there's people with a lot more influence out there than me banging a drum about these issues. But thankfully this weekend Sasaki is okay, but it was a scary crash to start off what would have been a brilliant weekend for him.
Yeah, it's a shame. Obviously, it was a horrible crash. Like you say, fortunately, he is relatively okay. I mean, he's still pretty battered and bruised. I imagine he'll be missing a few races, especially a vertebrae injury. Not much luck with vertebrae in the Max Racing team, but yeah, he's been very fast all season. So yeah, it probably could have been a good weekend. He was looking quite good. His teammate went pretty well as well in the over the whole weekend. So the bike definitely seemed to be working quite well. But yeah, they definitely showed way too much of it. We didn't need to see sort of Sasaki unconscious, like Masia, like down on the floor, like trying to talk to him. It was horrible to sort of look at that, because obviously, in that position he must be like so worried. So yeah, it's just horrible to look at. But that was the main really talking point from any Moto3 qualifying and practice. So we'll move on to the race. Started off a little bit of a breakaway at the very beginning, a small group. Again, the KTMs starting off very fast, trying to pull away. But then the big group, as it does at Mugello, always forms together. And Yama Masia, who was a little bit further down the order, attempted a bit of a pass on Stefano Nepper, and he did a bit of an interesting save there. He had to end up going through the gravel, but the front was completely gone coming through the Savelli corner. It was up the inside. The front was 100% folded. How he saved that, I have no idea. Then had to run through the gravel, and it put Masia right to the back of the pack. It also put Nepper right to the back, and then I think Nepper then crashed a couple corners later, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, it was pretty interesting. If you haven't seen that, definitely take a look at that save, because it was quite cool. It was a really good save there. And then moving on from that, obviously Dennis Fodger looked amazing all weekend. It was actually a surprise he wasn't on pole position, but I think it was just because Onshu got a bit of a slipstream to get pole. He was going around doing laps on his own, just like he was back in Le Mans, and he was trying to push the pace through the pack on. He got to the front trying to push, and then unfortunately on lap 10, where it all seemed to kick off, Fodger ended up hitting the deck.
Yeah, lap 10 was a massive turning point in the race. We have a list here of all the riders of crashed and what exactly had happened. But just going back to the Masia save, That is, if you know the corner Savelli and you've Casanova and Savelli, the fact he managed to save it and then pick the bike up just before he got to the gravel. It was a weekend of weird and wonderful saves. We'll just throw in that Vietti had a massive save in pre-practice 3 on Saturday morning. Ended up causing a collision between two other riders because they had to take avoiding action. But it was just a bit of a weird weekend in that sense. But with Messia's save, was just absolutely incredible. Again, like we said, if you can find it, it just feels like it goes on forever. You just don't know how he saves it, and he just gets himself upright before the gravel. But back to lap 10 of the race for Moto 3. Foggia looked like he was after doing what many riders have tried and failed and making a break at Mugello. Mugello is one of those tracks where fast S-bends, so left-right chicanes, where you can kind of upset the rider in front, you can kind of affect their rhythm. A really heavy dependent track on slipstream with that massive straight. So over the years there's been races. I remember when Mino won in 2017, 2016 I believe it was. He was in 18th, 19th with like a couple of laps to go. There was a group of nearly 20 riders battling for the podium for the whole race long. It was just a massive snake. And it actually looked at one point at the start that some riders had made a break, but they got pegged back pretty quickly when they started battling. That was Maria and a few other riders. But as we get back to lap 10, he was actually after making quite a nice little gap for himself and just flicked himself off as he came out of that same corner that Massia had to save Savelli. On the change of direction for Beato 1, just as he tried to sit the bike up, he just got flicked over. Now, a lot of people said maybe it was a bit of a damp patch there. A lot of people speculated he ran out onto the white lines, but on watch back, he didn't. He was quite a bit off. But an unusual crash at such a high speed that Moto 3 bikes, you really wouldn't have the torque to throw you off there. So I'd say it must have been probably down to track conditions. And that was the start of a crazy lap 10. A couple of corners later, we had McPhee and Holgado have nearly a carbon copy crash as Sasaki and Messia. Thankfully, Holgado hit McPhee's bike and they both walked away. John, again in that coming out of Ducati current tire corner, just did the exact same as a teammate did on Friday. Lit the rear up, went over the bars, and thankfully the bike just got in his way and they had a bit of a launch pad off the bike. Both riders seemed to be okay, but again, could have been a lot worse. Tight through the gravel after the incident with Foggia, and then coming into turn 1, we had Anshu and Suzuki collide. Suzuki, it was a bit of a racing incident in my opinion, because Anshu had gone a touch wide, Suzuki went to fill the gap, and two lines merged to one, and Anshu came off worse. But he did get a long lap for that, which is a bit harsh in my opinion. There wasn't much malice to it. There was contact, but it was both riders going for one piece of track, and the outside riders came off worse. It was a bit unfortunate for him, but I think it was a bit harsh for Suzuki, and I'm not the biggest fan of Suzuki, so it's quite probably surprising for me to be backing up, but I think that was a bit harsh on poor Tatsuki.
Yeah, I mean, it really changed his race in the end, because obviously he ended up finishing in third place. You say 3 seconds for a long lap penalty. Would have won, although it's easier said than done, because if he'd stayed in that same position, the group would have stayed with him. But even so, he clearly had really good pace. Something actually, I haven't made a note of it, but I've just kind of thought, I remember thinking it at the time, that he didn't seem to lose that much from the long lap penalty. So I think maybe some of these long lap penalties could do with looking at, because I think now it's been around for a few years. This is where you kind of can alter the system, and it does seem like the riders don't tend to lose that much time at a lot of the tracks now. They've kind of nailed how to do it. They know when in the race you should take it, and sort of how to try and take them optimally. So they're not so much of a penalty anymore, because obviously they were meant to be 3 seconds, but I don't think he was ever 3 seconds behind them. It was probably more like 2, maybe even less than that. Like Suzuki didn't seem to lose a lot of time from that, so that might be something worth looking at. But after that carnage on lap 10, that just left a small group, because all those crashes, obviously Fodger's crash and Tatai going to the gravel, McPhee and Holgado, Onshu and Suzuki, all those incidents broke up the pack completely, and we had a fight at the front with, I think it was just all the KTMs at that point as well? Again? Yeah. So another one of those
and
battles.
Suzuki coming into it, but at that point he was just a couple of seconds back.
Yeah, it was a few seconds off the back of them. And again, the two Aspar riders, the Gas guys, looking really, really fast. Again, playing the tactics really, really well. This is where we come on to the last lap, where Guevara managed to actually take the win on track, but he actually got his he lost the position because he went on the green through the Biondetti chicane, and that is the rules on the final lap. If you exceed the track limits, you get demoted a position. If they deem that you're within a gap where that would make sufficient difference, so basically if it's a rider within like 2 seconds of you, I think you get the penalty. If not, I don't think you get anything. So yeah, so Guevara lost the win there. But coming up towards the line, his teammate Garcia was actually leading coming out of the last corner, trying to make sure that he kept the win on the run to the line. And he did some very dodgy weaving, didn't he? It was quite dirty, really.
Yeah, he had kind of 2 goals at it, really, which is like the law is that you can defend your position. You can move, but this was 1, 2, and then a third one to try and kind of push him wide again to stop him from the run. So that's 3 attempts before, like, the corner. The race line is still maybe a couple of 100 yards away from the corner. It's not like they're trying to defend the actual racing line. It's just trying to break the slipstream, and it's incredibly dangerous. Again, if you can watch it back, you'll see it's just so quick and aggressive that it's just a side swipe. And if someone is already after, it's like the rider in front can't tell who's left or right, and they can't tell who's after getting a 3-bike slipstream. You could have seen Suzuki had a massive drive, went to the outside, and he could have just cleaned them out at 130 miles an hour. So we've seen it before. People got slapping the wrists, and it just continued again and again and again. So it's nearly a weekly thing. People have died. Still hasn't changed. I genuinely don't know how to. I don't have a solution, really. They need much stiffer penalties to make it to the point where if you do it,
even a penalty at all.
Yeah, exactly.
Garcia got rewarded. He won the race.
Yeah, exactly. Like, they need like race bans for this on regular, not like the one with Anshu where that was because it was a big crash. They banned him, and he wasn't even the worst one in that one. But have a race ban every time you do it. Simple as that. You'll see it much, much less then. You might see it the odd time then, and then you can kind of argue their case. But if you're getting a race ban for doing something, 99% of the riders aren't that stupid to do it then. They will stop it. So that you just need to clamp it down. You need to make it so strict to the point where it's just such a stupid move to do that it will ruin your season. Not that it will, I might get a 3-second penalty and go from first to second because I was 3 seconds out of third. They need to just make it absolutely crystal clear. If you weave that aggressively, now I've no problem with them coming out of the last corner, going all the way to the white line, trying to defend their line, but it's these quick jerks left and right at high speed within yards of each other that can be absolutely like craziness. Like, I just don't understand it, and it has to be penalised in some shape or form.
Yeah, 100%, because they did almost collide. That was the thing.
Yeah.
I mean, the weaving didn't even work anyway because he actually did lose the win on the run to the line, but then got given it back on account of Guevara's penalty. But then, personally, Garcia probably should have had a penalty. So really, the guy that should have won probably was Suzuki. But yeah, that's...
and he was the guy that got a penalty for...
Yeah, he'd already got a penalty, so...
yeah, so...
At least
that's
they were
the end
giving
of
some
race
penalties
direction
out,
corner.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we've not had to bash them too much this time. It's just them not giving someone a penalty. At least it wasn't... sending riders out to their doom again, like in the 2 previous times they've done that. But enough about Moto 3 anyway, we'll move on to Moto 2. Now, one of the most interesting stories of the weekend was actually Matteo Pessini coming back doing a wild card for the Gas team. Been a good while since he's obviously raced full time in Moto 2. He's still been keeping himself sharp. He trains with the VR46 guys. If you follow him on Instagram or anything like that, you'll have seen that he'd been testing with a Moto 2 bike around Misano like a couple of weeks ago. So, you know, he was getting ready for it, and he was really, really fast. He was looking super, super fast.
Yeah, I actually, when I read the headline, I was kind of like, why?
Yeah.
What's he have to gain? It was very random. It came out of blue. It was a weird one, because I was like, it's not like he was out of it's not like he lost his ride last year and he's trying to put himself up. He's been out of the paddock for a bit now, and he's getting on a bit. I was kind of reading going like, that's just a weird one. And as well to the Aspar team, like, they have 2 competitive riders in that class. But just when I read it, I was kind of looking at it going like, that just, to me from the outside, not knowing anything more about the rider personally and the team, it just seemed like a weird decision. But saying that, he was strong. And I was quite happy for him. He is absolutely brilliant around Mugello. And a lot of people don't know, but he has a severe right hand issue. Or is it right or left hand?
This is,
It's his
it's
left
right,
hand?
isn't it? I think because he
Yeah,
only has
so
the throttle on the right hand because everything else, the
yeah,
brake and the clutch is all on the left.
many moons ago, a bad crash and he had like nerve damage and muscle damage to his right forearm. Basically lost strength, couldn't brake with that, so they've transferred the controls of the bike over. So you have the clutch, the front brake, all on his left hand. It's quite trippy if you see it because there's like a couple of levers. I think he also has like a thumb brake on his left hand, so there's like many levers on it. It's pretty weird, and like a lot of people said, it's crazy that he can ride at that level with such an unorthodox style. But for years he was able to do it, and he won a couple of races in Moto2 back in the day, and he was absolutely rapid for someone that went off the bike. Obviously, he's still training, doing a bit of Misano, spends a lot of time at the ranch with the Rossi and Co. But still, to come into a World Championship event at a track that pretty much everyone knows and be that quick, that was a little bit special, I must say. I must tip my hat to him. I was really impressed by Piscini.
Yeah, it was really good because I think he qualified fifth, which is
Yeah.
nothing to sniff at there. In the Moto 2, the most difficult class almost. I mean, MotoGP, I suppose, it's going to be harder than Moto 2, but Moto 2 is so difficult because of how close it is. Everyone's on Kalex bikes effectively, so yeah, it was a super impressive. But moving on to the race, then it started off as a bit of a typical Moto 2 race. To be honest, it was pretty boring till about halfway through. Pretty processional, a few passes here and there. But then it all started to kick off with Aaron Cannett's crash at the last corner. Buccini, he was trying to catch up to the back of Pedro Costa in front of him, and unfortunately he ended up crashing, just trying to keep up with him. So that was the start of the race getting a bit interesting there. So very unfortunate for Canet.
Yeah, so once again, the question marks over Cannet is when someone like a top Moto2 rider is in the class, I just think he misses that small percentage. And it looked like in Le Mans, Pedro made a huge step, and a lot of people saw that when he crashed out, they're like, well, he rolled the wheels off it in qualifying for a few laps and he was over the limit in the race, where he made a small mistake in a very tricky corner in France. And a lot of people didn't really count him in for this race, thinking he'd have any chance. Well, like, it was kind of a flash in the pan. He showed what he can do, but he still has a long way to go. But as soon as he got on track this weekend, he looked strong. Looked like he gained a lot of confidence. Like, people forget he's 17. But again, he went through the weekend stunningly. It was quick. A lot of people were tipping him, all right, maybe he can do it. This can be the race. If not, the next one or week after or whatever, people are saying it is coming. But he just had such good pace. He was just stretching Canet just a bit thin. And it's actually quite a common crash into the final corner on a Moto2 bike. I remember Lorenzo Baldassari high-siding himself on entry over Taka Nakagami many moons ago. And once again, Canet just lacking, maybe again his injury playing up there. Again, he is quite badly injured still after that Portimao crash, and he gave himself another bad egg beating there. But can't take anything away from Pedro Acosta. He was absolutely faultless. He was so quick, and he was a big part of why Canet ended up crashing out of the race.
Yeah, he seems to definitely found something. Obviously, the last race, like you say, was amazing. Some people put it down to just a good qualifying time. But ever since that Barcelona test, he seems to have found a bit of confidence again. Sort of got the pace it looked like he was going to have after the preseason test at Portimao and things like that. So good to see that he's finally up there. He's got his first win. I reckon he will be one to watch for the rest of the season now. I mean, we saw what he did in Moto3. He got his first win so early on in that season, then he was an absolute winning machine after that. So I imagine something very, very similar will happen here. But speaking of other riders that were looking pretty quick this weekend, Celestina Vietti obviously was the championship leader going into the race. He's had a couple poor rounds, not so good. I mean, really, since we got back to Europe, like we've touched on it the last few podcasts, he's not really been there. But this weekend, he looked like he was back on the pace. He qualified quite well. Had a bit of a poor start, to be honest, but then he was on a comeback ride. He just got back up onto the podium, and unfortunately, a rare bike failure, to be honest, with the Triumphs and the Hondas. Moto2 bikes don't break down very much, and unfortunately, Celestina Vietti had some sort of issue. I'm not sure what the issue was. It might have been the chain, by the sounds of it, or the gearbox or something like that, because the engine was actually okay. But the Moto2 bikes tend to be pretty reliable, so pretty unfortunate for Vietti there. But he's had a decent amount of luck this season, so it seems like his luck finally ran out. But it was a shame because he was looking much quicker again this weekend.
Yeah, it was. It was actually a damn shame because all season long I've been tipping him as a bit of a dark horse, and then he had such a good start. And I was always going, that's great, but we've seen this with Baldassare before. We've seen Nakagami have these kind of like, oh, wonderful starts and then just go absolutely nowhere. And I was hoping it wouldn't happen. He went to Texas, crashed. Like we talk about how lucky he was, nowhere in Portimao, and ended up getting a handful of points that day because of just being slow, being out of the sync with the top guys, and getting a massive bit of luck there, and then unfortunately did come back to bite him. He looked strong all weekend, not as dominant as he looked early in the season, the first couple of flyaway rounds, but it was by far his best round in a European track. So again, maybe home track, extra 5% push, but it was tragic to see him end up getting the bike failure. It looked like something, I reckon, chain driven, something like that, because he still had gears. I could see the onboard that he was just flying up and down through the gears to see could he get any drive, and the engine was still revving away fine. So it definitely was some sort of drive shaft issue. So he's lost the lead of the championship now. Like, it's going to be a tough one. We're going to Catalunya next. We're going to have Pedro Acosta, Canet. It's the worst thing to happen for him, because he was on a bit of a downward slope. If he throws on the podium there, beats Canet, who crashed, he beats Iagor, who was ahead of at the time. I go, all right, fair enough. That's a good recovery ride, good damage limitation for that weekend. You're kind of back on it. You've shown a bit of form. Go straight into Catalunya a week later. You're probably on a bit of a high still, and it could propel you. It's funny how much of a mental game this is, when just a small good result at a home track like that, ending a bad run of form, could kind of propel you straight into the mid-season break. But it'll be interesting, as I say every week, to see what happens next weekend with him, because he is a bit of a question mark. And I feel for him though, because he did everything right this weekend, whereas some weekends he's gotten lucky, but this weekend he was on the podium on genuine pace.
Yeah, it was very unfortunate for him, of course. But again, I think it is one of those things, like you say, we have to see what happens in the next race, because he's not been on form. He gets back to Italy, a track where they were literally training a couple of weeks ago. So, it's again, probably doesn't tell you an awful lot about how his form is going to be over the rest of the season. Losing the championship lead now as well, not ideal for him at all. So, yeah, a weekend to forget for Vietti, but a lot of positives for him to take, really, in terms of his actual pace. But someone that has got a lot of positives to take out of this weekend is, in fact, Joe Roberts. Now, he's kind of always been there or thereabouts, Joe Roberts, especially back in his American racing days. Some weekends he'd be so fast, he'd be fighting for the podium, but then other weekends he'd be down at like 20th place. And it's been even more of that, really, since he joined Ital Trans last year. He's maybe had like one race where he looked decent, but the rest of the time he's been struggling a bit. But obviously he got the win in Portimao. But this race, miles better than his Portimao performance, as far as I'm concerned. Because like we were saying, Portimao, he was in that position because he was slow in the first part of the race, and all the people crashed in front of him. Whereas this time, he was genuinely like one of the fastest guys on the track. He was basically probably the second fastest, aside from Acosta, which I suppose makes sense because he finished second place, but I mean, people did fall off. But in terms of actual pace anyway, I think he was, he was looking really, really good, Joe Roberts. So, outstanding ride from him, and to do it in Italy for Ital Trans, I imagine they're pretty thrilled with that.
Yeah, it's funny how this sport works, because a couple of years ago, they wanted him to join, Aprilia wanted him in their GP team, and he turned it down. And that was kind of where he was at his peak performance. It was before Cambobia came over. He was kind of the next big thing in Moto2 as an American. People wanted him, and he turned down Aprilia, and a lot of people were like, well, that's brave, but he's probably on an upwards, so he might get a better ride. And kind of since then he went downhill, and I actually really liked the guy. I have a lot of time for him, and it was a shame to see him kind of fighting for 21st every week. And you'd hear John Hopkins talking about him as his manager, saying that like he just needs to put it together. It's just not clicking for him. This, that, and the other. I think Cambobia came into the class and seemed instantly to be as quick as him with less experience, and Cambobia just got quicker and quicker. And then it was like, well, Cambobia is the man for GP. Joe Roberts is kind of, after blowing his chance, he should have went to Aprilia, even though it probably wasn't the best at the time with the state of Aprilia back then a couple of years ago. But now, this weekend, we'll cover it again in a moment when we get to the GP category, but a certain Aprilia team have announced a second team what a time to maybe put your name back into that hat for a second seat on an Aprilia, on a very, very quick and a competitive Aprilia, as we'll find out in the GP race. But fantastic ride. Again, the Portimao race, I was happy for him. I suppose the second race was its own race. You need to think of that way. He performed the best in that race. He was absolutely rapid in them questionable conditions. Others fell. Dixon fell under pressure. And Joe Roberts just absolutely was brilliant in that race, and he deserved it. Again, you could say, right, if it was a normal race, he probably would have finished in the points maybe. But again, this weekend, it was genuine pace. There was no massive rain, just 6 riders down in front. He managed to scrape a podium, otherwise even 10th. It was genuine, had raw pace, and I was delighted for him. And I will be interested to see will his name be thrown back in to contention to go up to Aprilia if they're still interested in him. I think they would be after a performance like that.
Yeah, you'd think so, especially with obviously having the right passport. Dorna always want another American. Well, not another, they want an American in the class. Although, I don't know whether he's burnt his bridges with Aprilia. I mean, I suppose they wouldn't be too happy, but then I suppose they know at the time their bike wasn't that great, so people didn't want to get on it. And if he was he could maybe argue that he just wanted more experience, and that's why he turned them down. So, yeah it's probably still on the list there. Obviously, they'll have the Dorna back in as well. It does seem like they want to at least have one young rider. Perhaps they could put him alongside a more experienced rider. But of course, we'll sort of come on to MotoGP in a little bit. But one more interesting point from this race was the Mark VDS boys. They were going hammer and tongue pretty much the whole race, to be honest. Both Arbolino and Lowe's. First time we've really seen them do that, because usually it's just one is quick and the other is not. I think the only other time where it's really been like that was Qatar. And I think Arbolino was probably... Actually, no, it wasn't Qatar. There was one race where they were pretty close on track. Was it maybe Mandalika?
I think Mandalika.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly now, but there was one where they were pretty close. But this is the first time they've properly battled, and to be honest, Arbolino was putting some aggressive moves on Sam, considering he's his teammate. He's sort of taking his line to turn one every lap, and it didn't really seem like they were helping each other, because they seemed to basically have the same pace, because one would overtake, and then like the next lap, the other one would go back in front. Like they weren't really... they cost themselves a decent shot, a better result, because they kind of got dropped a bit with all their battling. But it did come to a bit of a head with Arbolino. Well, he just took Sam Lowe's out, trying to make a pass on him, which, it's unfortunate for Sam, of course, and obviously unfortunate for Tony as well, because he got a long lap penalty. The team are probably going to be quite annoyed at him for taking out his teammate. He also then has to have his teammate be annoyed at him, so just not a good day in the end for Mark VDS. Easily avoidable, really, but with being a bit fairer with each other. But yeah, Tony's only his second season of Moto2, so just one of those things, you make mistakes sometimes. But yeah, the Mark VDS guys, there might be a bit of a rivalry forming there now.
Yeah, it was a bit of a naivety from Arbolino. I know he's not a rookie, but I suppose a rookie mistake. He's had good results already, but he just, I don't know, maybe he was trying to there's like an in-house battle that we don't know, but he probably wants, like, you always know contracts, when contracts are up, Sam doesn't have a ride for next year. He maybe want to kind of cement himself as a number one rider, and just these little mental things that you don't really see too much from the camera and from the TV side of it, that maybe he was just trying to cement himself as a number one rider in the team, but he was over the limit many times, and it was unfortunate, because Sam's had 4 DNFs in a row coming into this weekend. 2 of them weren't his fault, and now he's had 5 and 3 of them weren't his fault. So you're just starting to think, like, was it necessary? Like, you weren't going to win it. You always have to respect your teammate more, regardless of what you think of the guy on the bike. It's your teammate. You're employed by that team. There's 2 of you out there to score points. It's just this terribleness from the riding perspective, like that. You'll go that aggressive against your teammate. Now, if it was for the victory, you go, look, they were battling for the win. They weren't battling for the win. It was a bit silly of them. Again, a bit naive, a bit of a rookie mistake, but hopefully they can put it behind themselves, because they actually seemed like they got on very well beforehand. Sam seemed absolutely pissed when he got back to the pits, was consoled by his fiancée, if I'm not mistaken, who is the team boss. That's a topic for another story, but anyway. And he looked like he was about to kill someone. He was absolutely
fuming. He was fuming. I don't think I've ever seen Sam Lowe's angry.
Yeah, he was trying to hold it back, again, like his on camera, like Sam would be quite respectful in that sense, but he was absolutely raging. And again, like when he was knocked off, he went ballistic in the gallop, as you do. But again, though, Sam was on for a good result. It would have been great for Sam. I'm, as an Irish person, I talk about Sam openly that I have no connections to him, so I just speak my mind about him. If I think he's not up to speed, I say it. And the couple of race weekends where he threw it away, of course, obviously getting knocked off in Texas, the wet weather in Portimao, not his fault, but it's just unfortunate for me because I'd like to see him do it. I actually like the guy, but I always feel like that he has a crash in him, which he does. And he crashed out of Mugello last year when in a good position. It was one of those races where he did 2 laps in a row. We took a small blow to Fernandez and then crashed in Savelli. Just kind of a needless one. But this weekend he looked like he rode at his limit but knew where it was. And he looked quite controlled, looked quite consistently through the weekend. So it could have been a good turning point. But unfortunately now it's another DNF for him.
Yeah, quite unfortunate for Sam Lowes, and yeah, like you say, he was very angry in the gravel, and it's probably one of those things where it'd been building the whole race. He'd probably been getting angry at all the aggressive passes. I think he probably stuffed one back up the inside of Arbolino once as well, in sort of retaliation, and then to be taken out, I suppose you would be extremely angry. But then moving on to MotoGP, quite a lot to actually talk about in the weekend before we actually get into the race. Something that obviously we were touching on earlier on is now Aprilia are going to have a satellite team for next year. The RNF team are moving away from Yamaha. So that's a pretty big story because that means 2 more Aprilias on the grid and 2 less Yamahas. That's a big change.
Yeah, it's huge. It's one of the biggest things we've had in the last 5-10 years. Probably since KTM have come in, we'd say. It's probably the biggest change upon the grid.
Aside from Suzuki leaving like last week.
Well, yeah, that hasn't happened yet, even though by their performances it might as well be gone.
Might as well be gone, yeah.
But for years, Yamaha's second bike was the bike you want to be on as a rookie. And the last 18 months, 2 years, it's just been a pitfall of disasters. Rossi couldn't get on with it. Davi said when he got on it felt like a boat. He can't believe how big and lethargic the bike is. They stuck an inexperienced Darren Binder on it, and he's doing better than most expected, and he's doing quite well. He was second Yamaha today, so make of that what you will. Davi is, I don't want to say past it because that's disrespectful to the man's talent, but he is past it. I don't want to go back on what I'm saying, but like there's no nice way of saying it. He should have stayed in the Italian Championship doing motocross instead of coming back to GP. It was obviously the fire was still there, but just his positioning, the contract, the team, it's all just a bit of a sham at the moment, and it's kind of not ruined his reputation, but it's definitely tarnished the end of his career after going from being a great 250, 125 rider to a solid midfield man, then jumping on and making Ducati what they are, and then going toe-to-toe with Marquez for a handful of years to being now a mobile chicane at the back of the grid, pretty much. Like he's seconds. I think in the wet qualifying, kind of dry wet qualifying, the leaders were going quicker than Davi had gone all weekend in like perfectly good conditions, which is that's just pitiful. Like, and I feel sorry for him because he's a rider with so much experience that he knows what Yamaha need to do, but they're kind of like, well, Fabio's winning, we're going to listen to him. And he's saying that they have inherent lack of rear grip, and then Fabio's saying they want more power, and they don't really seem to be doing anything about either. But Davi is convinced if they can improve their rear grip, they get out of the corner better, and they would stretch their legs earlier on the straights and be less affected at the end of the straight. And you can't really argue with a guy that's had that many years of experience. Rossi always complained about the rear grip of the Yamaha at his time there, and it looks like they just got a rider who just can work with low grip but also be amazing on corner entry, kind of like a Marquez on Honda, where he can just gloss over the cracks of the machinery he's on. But onto the pretty side, and I just want to jump back to the Joe Roberts, what you said that maybe he burnt his bridges. Aprilia went after Scott Redding pretty much when they came back into him. He told them, come back when your bike is sorted. Now, he did end up signing for them about 3 years later, and the bike wasn't much better, and they fell out straight away. But would they be I don't think they're still the same company, but maybe there still is an option if they're interested in Joe Roberts. He's a kind of a taller rider. I'd like to see him on that bike, but it's Rosali and Friends is what I know as RNF. It was always what was the kind of joke about RNF. Nobody knows what it stands for, but
it's to do with his kids, I think. I think
Is
it's,
that
I think
what
it
it
stands for
is?
his kids' names. Yeah,
Italian Friends is funnier, so we'll stick with that. But
Razlan
the
Needs
art,
Funds was quite a good one that went around at the time as well.
yeah, and the Aprilia will have two more bikes in the grid. It will be supported by the factory. It's something they wanted to do for a long time. They said they got the option, they pulled the trigger, they jumped on as fast as they could, and it'll be really interesting and fun to see four Aprilias next year because as much as Maverick on the Aprilia has been good to see up against the Leish, Maverick is inconsistent and a bit of a question mark. You don't know what you're getting. I'd like to see more of a Rins on it or more of a kind of conventional rider just to see what like an actual decent GP rider could do against a Leish on that equipment. Whereas Maverick looks like he has great pace and then ends up qualifying 19th, and then has great race pace and then ends up 14th. So it's kind of a he's like the worst person in GP to go on the bike because he doesn't tell you any more about how the bike is, or it doesn't show you anything more about it. But overall, I think it's a great move for RNF. It's a big wake up call for Yamaha, who apparently might be on the way out of the sport as well. There are a few rumours that the way they treated RNF after Petronas pulled out, that they were kind of not all in. They were kind of on the fence about it, and they weren't really going full-fledged support for them, and that is part of the reason why RNF have left them. But two bikes, there's only going to be two inline fours on the grid next year, which I think is an absolutely astonishing fact, and it will definitely affect Yamaha, because Yamaha next year will be a one-man team if they don't get Morbidelli back into some sort of form. It's crazy to think, really.
Well, they pretty much already are a one-man team.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, again, Fabio second place, and then like you say, Darren Binder top Yamaha. I don't think he was even in the points, was he? So
He's 16.
yeah, so yes, you don't blame RNF for changing bikes exactly. I mean,
no.
it can't be any worse. We've seen the Aprilia looks pretty good. They can only improve. So yeah, makes full sense that they've swapped there. But you did briefly touch on the wet and dry qualifying session while we were talking about Dovi's times, and I don't think anyone would have predicted how that session played out, or how both those sessions played out, Q1 and Q2. Because Fabio Di Giannantonio, who has had a pretty decent season so far, but been very anonymous, he's just kind of got on with his business. You know, he's not been pulling out amazing results, he's not been topping a session here and there, he's not been putting himself in the top 5, but he's been finishing solidly. I don't know if he's been in the top 10 yet, I think he had been in the top 10, but he's just basically just going about his business. He goes through tops Q1, then puts it on pole. Unbelievable. The Grassini team, they are having one hell of a season. Bastianini, obviously being touted as a factory rider in the future, which, whilst I mentioned that, we didn't get any announcement, even though we were told that we would, on who's going to ride that bike, so it's a little bit interesting. But yeah, Grassini having such a good season, Di Giannantonio doing really well as well, and then it wasn't just him. Another rookie, Marco Bezzecchi, was right there in second place. Marini as well, so both the VR46 bikes, second and third place on the grid. Just what a qualifying session. 3 Ducatis, 3 Italians, 2 rookies. Just amazing.
Yeah, it was one of those sessions where you just really appreciate how talented these guys are. Like, you watch them week in, week out, and you go, oh, but Jesus, Jorge Martinez down in P9, he's 0.4 off. Jesus, he's not with it this weekend. And then you realise, like, you watch them this weekend where it's raining and they're doing 221 miles an hour into first gear corner, and it's just a wet track with like 25 degrees temp, and you're just going, this is just, how is this physically how is this actually possible? You watch them week in, week out, you understand what they can do, but you just start to, it's a bit like everything, you kind of just mentally make that switch. I was like, yeah, this is just normal. 65 degrees lean lag is just normal. Marcus saving the front for 50 feet is just normal, where these are just physic breaking things that they're doing. And again, this is one of these weekends where you just go, take my hat off. They all were stunning. They risked so much, every single one of them. And it's usually one of those weekends, one of those sessions where the younger rookies and the hungry riders really risk everything, like Fabio did, and got the reward, and it was brilliant to see it. And the day that Valentino's number was retired, the 46 was retired before qualifying on Saturday, and then his 2 boys took it on the front row, so pretty good day out for VR46.
Yep, I'm sure the crowd were nice and happy with that, and obviously Valet as well, actually being in attendance, although I'm sure he would have been, even if it wasn't the retirement ceremony, I'm sure he would have gone to the Italian GP. So yeah, it was a good day for them. But just after qualifying, we had yet another huge announcement. So that's why we've got so much to talk about before the race. And that's that Marc Marquez is basically leaving for the rest of the year now. He's having surgery on his arm. Sounds like it's some... Actually, it's quite a common surgery that they do. They're saying they do it to children a lot when they've been born with deformed arms and things like that. But basically, they're going to break his arm and sort of rotate it so it should be back to how it is, so that his shoulder behaves normally. Because apparently his shoulder is like sort of rotating when it's got force on it. So sounds like it's going to be quite a long recovery period. Obviously, that arm again, you'll be praying that it doesn't get infected. But what another turn? Obviously, he's been in so much pain apparently, so he's having this specialised surgery. But how much must he wish now that he just took third place in Jerez 2020?
No, he probably could be a 10-time world champion by then.
He would have won every season since, I would have thought.
Like, if you think of how inconsistent, like the Mir year, that rhymes. How inconsistent everyone was that year.
He was.
And exactly, he had Rossi Yamaha pace back in like the mid 2000s, where he just had, like, he could play with them if he wanted. He would have made that 2019 season look average. He would have been that quick in 2020. And now we sit here and he has won 3 races in as nearly as many years. And he's just basically signed this year off. He's just said, we'll actually go back to qualifying. He was in Q1. He was having a dreadful weekend. He finished FP3 and P21. He had no pace. And then he went into Q1, basically sat on the back of a GP22 of Jack Miller for the whole session and managed to pip him into Q2. It started to get raining slightly heavier coming out. Neil Hodgson for BT said just before they went green flag for Q2, he went outside the door. He said, it's raining heavier. This is not going to work on wet tyres. Everyone came out. They looked really gingerly. Marquez, who had been previously out in the previous session, came out, went around the outside of everyone in turn 1 and absolutely threw himself to the moon into turn 2. Off throttle high side. It kind of, if you see it in the onboards, you kind of see his body has one go, it comes back and then it just launches him. Bike was on fire, again holding his arm, just snapped the forks. Session got reflagged because the bike kind of just was in bits at the exit of turn 2. And that was all sorted anyway. Qualifying went, and about 10 minutes after qualifying, 45 minutes from now, we're going to have a massive debrief and there's going to be a press conference for a Honda. And we were all thinking 99% sure it's going to be he's going for the force surgery. It had been rumoured throughout the season, or throughout the weekend, that Speed Week, a German publisher, had kind of leaked that he was in need of a fourth one, that he was looking at getting it. And everyone was fairly sure. A lot of people were wondering, was he going to call it quits and just be done with the sport after having... It was a huge crash he had in Q1 or Q2 just at the start. But no, he said that after he got infected the first time, it really affected the recovery. He broke it again, opening a window, which none of us believe he had a motocross crash, which they have yet to confirm.
Those windows are just dangerous.
Yeah, geez, them Spanish windows must be huge. And it's been just a collection of errors on his behalf, the doctor's behalf, Honda's behalf, and now we sit here where he has one arm, and now he's actually doing damage to his left arm, his good arm, because he's overriding the bike and he's putting so much stress on his left shoulder, which was bad for many years before he had it operated on, and probably he still isn't the strongest, if I'm correct. Usually, if you go back to Valentino, he almost broke his shoulder in pre-season crash for 2010, really bad. He strained it and it pretty much affected him for the rest of his career. And I believe Mark is in a similar situation where his left shoulder, well, both his shoulders at this point are pretty much knackered. But Marcus had openly said that it's not just a bike, it's I can't get on with it, I can't get comfortable on it, my riding position is wrong. Under heavy load, my whole arm rotates, which is just horrific. So I'm kind of glad that he's gone, okay, we'll write the season off. The operation that we said about kind of breaking the bone, rotating it and sorting it, your average recovery time for a normal non-alien is about 8 months. A lot of people expect them at a minimum to be up for 4 months, usually between 4 and 6 months. Today's date, if you put by the time to get away from the track, it's going to be in America. I think in Minnesota he's getting it done. Something to do with Rafael Nadal's surgeons. during next week. So you're going to say it's probably going to be June before the start. Put 4 months onto that, you're into September. So if it goes perfectly well, he might be back for the last 2 rounds of the season. A lot of people are thinking he might come back just for Valencia, try it there, and then do the Monday test after the end of the season that they all do. I think, personally, no matter how well it goes, the best thing he could do is sit out the rest of the season, train as much as he can to get back physically strong. Not race fit, just get muscle, get cartilage, the bone, get everything back the way it should be. Give himself the 3 or 4 months off for the winter, and then basically have 10 months off where he just rebuilds, because it's what he needs. He's 30 at the start of next season in March. He'll turn 30, March time. Oh no, the day after Rossi's birthday is his birthday, February 17th. So he will be 30 years old. So he's in his... A lot of people are thinking now is his prime age, where it'll be the next couple of years will be his best years before he starts to kind of slow down a bit. So it kind of has to happen now, because he says if he rides on the way he's riding now, he will pretty much end his own career because of the way he's riding, the crashes he has having, and his performances aren't what he can do. But the pace is still there, which is the scary part. So it could still work. He could still win another couple of championships. The Honda still isn't right, so it's going to be a long 12 months from Marcus from now on, because surgery next week, a long rehabilitation. That came out wrong. Rehab. And he's going to have to be sat in the sideline watching Fabio Quartararo win races, watching Ducatis dominate, and he's just going to be sat there with one arm again back in the same position. And it's going to be tough for him. It'll be very interesting to see if he can mentally stop himself coming back too early. That's his biggest challenge, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. Obviously everyone's saying about him maybe coming back at the end of the year. Like, it might be quite important for him to maybe do that Valencia test. But then if he's not feeling up to it, then it's not worth it. It's only a day's worth of data, I guess. So it's one of those things. The testing is restricted based on the tyres, so I suppose he can always do his tests later if he wants to. I suppose Honda can sort of rent out a track, although I'm not 100% sure how the testing regulations are exactly. But yeah, he'll want to probably do that test. But again, like you say, he shouldn't come back too early. He should make sure. And I think this time, one, he knows that. And two, I think the people around him also know that, when really we know they should have stopped him in the first place with the coming back next week after having your arm plated. It was always going to be too soon. I mean, again, I bet he really regrets that decision, because he could have sat out a few races, probably still won the title that year anyway.
Yeah.
But moving on to the race now, first thing to talk about really is Pecco Bagnaia. I mean, what a race he had. Fantastic, once again looking smooth and fast. Obviously he had to bounce back after that race in Le Mans, where again obviously he was looking fast, but he made a mistake, lost the lead to Bastianini, then made another mistake, fell off, lost 20 points there. We were saying at the time it was so needless. He should have just settled for the position. He wasn't going to win the race that day. He should have just took that. But this time it looked like he made no mistakes at all. Didn't have the best start, to be honest. He dropped back quite far. I think he ran wide at turn 1. I think that's what happened to him.
Yeah, he did say himself that he broke ridiculously late into turn 1, and that's the reason why he dropped back to P9. Yeah, so he made a mistake at the first corner, dropped back, like you say, to P9, but then just sort of sliced his way through. It was sort of a calm, measured. It wasn't over the top or anything like that. It was just smooth, clean moves. He got his way up. Obviously, I think it helped him that it was the VR46 Ducatis leading the race, really. I imagine if it was, if Fabio was like in the lead at that point, I don't know whether he would have still won. Like, he probably would have lost too much time to Fabio. But he managed to catch up, pass everybody, and then just sort of ride away. It was one of those races a bit like Jerez. It was quite close. He never fully got away from Quartararo. But yeah, it was fantastic performance of Bagnaia, faultless, and it's nice to see him bounce back from the crash in France. Yeah, and just to put into perspective, if he did come home in P2 in Le Mans, he would be only 20 points off of Fabio, and now he's actually 43 points off. So that's a costly crash in Le Mans. Like you said, he was pretty clinical at the start of the race. He was pretty hot knife through butter. He was cutting through him quite quickly. He seemed not really in a rush, but he seemed like he wanted to get to the front early. He didn't want to sit there. I think the tire pressures, again, such a high speed track, you rely a lot on the edge grip. You're always on the edge of the tire, that track. So he was pretty pronto in getting through the pack and made it look pretty clean. And then he got to the front, not really checked out. I think at that point he knew his own pace. He got there, and it's worth mentioning how great Fabio Quartararo's opening couple laps were, because he was battling for the podium at that point and managed to jump into P2. And it was pretty much another Jerez race where you would have two halves of the lap. You'd have the Yamaha in sector 2 and 3 taking 0.3 out, Ducati taking 0.1 back in sector 1 and taking 0.2 back in sector 4, and that was a lap. Some laps there might be slightly little changes to it where it did gain or lose a tenth each, but unfortunately, even if Fabio got close enough, I don't know where or how he could have passed him. I was surprised how Fabio was able to pass all the other Ducatis, but just hats off to Pecco. It was important he had this result. If he ended up behind Fabio again, it could have been pretty detrimental to the championship.
Yeah, like you say, I don't think Fabio probably wouldn't have been able to get past Bagnaia. I think again it probably helped Fabio also that it was the VR46 guys at the front and Digi, because they probably haven't ever raced Quartararo like at all, so they wouldn't have known. I mean, I suppose you know that the Yamaha's quick in the twisty bits, but they would probably not have expected some of the passes he made, whereas someone like Bagnaia, who's battled him for the last year or so, Miller, Zarco, Martin, they probably would have known to watch out for that, so they might have been able to take different lines through some of those corners to park it and stop him getting in front. But even still, it was an amazing performance from Quartararo. I can't believe it, because he qualified? Did he qualify like 6th place or something like that?
Fifth.
Yeah, so it wasn't a terrible qualifying, but when you're behind all those Ducatis, that's usually it, race over for a Yamaha. But his start was phenomenal. He got off the line so well, he broke so deep into turn 1, and maybe that's what sucked Bagnaia in a little bit, potentially. Maybe seeing Fabio break so late, I'm not too sure. But he got straight up there. Some of the passes he was doing, like trying to hang it round through turn 1 when they were trying to slipstream him, his exit out of the last corner was phenomenal. He was managing to sort of negate the Ducati's advantage by just getting such a good exit, so gaining a few metres on them there. They'd get the slipstream, they'd sort of pass him, but then he'd match them on the brakes, so they couldn't actually... he'd go to the inside defender, and they couldn't do it. They had to go round the outside, and it was just amazing. He really is. He's the best rider on the grid, if you ask me, at the moment, because he just, by a good way as well, just because the bike he's on is so slow on the straights. Obviously, I know he's making the time through the corners, but he's the only one doing that, so you can't just say that it is the Yamaha automatically being better. So hats off to Fabio. What an amazing performance it was from him. But I have mentioned a couple of times there, the VR46 battle. The VR46 guy's been at the front. Nice to see that bike. I mean, it's one of the liveries I didn't particularly like at the start of the season, but it's definitely grown on me. Not that was why it was nice to see it, the livery or anything like that, but it was just nice to see some different riders at the front. Marini, Bezzecchi, they've not really been there. Bezzecchi's kind of been there every so often on a few sessions. I think Marini's put it on the front row once, but to actually see them throughout the whole race was good to see, wasn't it? Really, especially their home race, it was fantastic to see.
Yeah, it was really, it was interesting to see, because it did show more that Digi was a rookie, because he did go backwards faster, whereas the other two, like Bastianini was on the podium for probably half the race. Marini was they were battling each other, they were leading. It was a 1-2 at one point for the VR46, and with Rossi there, I thought that was a bit special. His first Mugello race that he's retired from, and then his two boys out front leading the GP race was a bit of a nice moment. But they did a stellar job, really, to get home P5 and P6 after putting it on the front row. And a lot of people said, right, they'll probably drop to P9, P10. They'll get a good top 10 each. But, absolutely can't fault them at all. Luca Marini struggles a lot with his weight. He's quite tall. He's actually been calling for Dorna to bring a collective weight category. So you have to weigh a certain amount, like Formula 1 does. And it's a big issue for him. He says that he can't. One of his biggest issues, he has said, he has to be so light that he can't carry enough muscle to last the length of the race. He gets tired, which is a big issue where his pace goes. He had that issue in his rookie year. And Bezzecchi has just been stunning as a rookie. I'm so impressed with him. Again, I was so happy to see him there and battling for the podium. I was hoping he'd get the podium, But in the end, he finished in P5, got pipped by Aleix Espargaro, who ended up on the podium, as well as Joan Zarco, who again, just the extra bit of experience, just showed off. And a great result for him getting P4. But overall, you can't really fault the VR46 bikes. The only thing I'll say about them all weekend, I was slightly disappointed they didn't have a special livery from Mugello. But other than that, they were pretty much perfect.
Yeah, the special liveries have kind of gone out of style with the VR46, haven't they, a little bit now? Because Rossi was always one for special liveries, and I don't think he really ever had one in the last 10 years of his career. That's what he was known for back in the day. And maybe it's a corporate thing, but then once it's his own team, he can surely do what he wants. So, yeah, I don't know. It was a little bit weird. It was nice to see the special helmets. Obviously, there was a special livery for Goscinny, wasn't there? Special livery for snipers in Moto 2. Moto 3, sorry. Was there any in Moto 2? I think that's why I said Moto 2, because I was trying to think if there was any in Moto 2.
Couple of special helmets, no liveries from memory.
Yeah, just some special, I suppose, it's not really any teams. Ital Translate just was a normal livery, and same with VR46. So, it was a bit of a shame there was no special livery there. So it's a good point for them to have, that being the worst part of the weekend, not having a special livery. They can take positives from that. Maybe next year, or maybe at Misano, they'll turn up with something nice. Perhaps.
Yeah, I was thinking Misano too as well.
Perhaps maybe. They could just do both, though. It'd be nice.
Yeah.
But moving on from the VR46 then to some more Ducatis. Obviously, we're on about the Goscinny team being so strong, Enea Bastianini being the main driving force behind that. But today, it was one of his weaker days again. Obviously, he's had one crash already this season, I think, right? At Portimao, was it, that he crashed? Yeah. And then he crashed, obviously, today. But he looked pretty desperate quite early on. He was going for some very unlike Bastianini moves, a bit divey into turn 1 up the inside of... I think it was a fellow Ducati rider, but I don't remember which one it was now.
Zarco, I think.
Yeah, I think it was Zarco. Yeah, so he went for a bit of a desperate move. He was looking a bit desperate. So I think when he crashed, it wasn't so much of a surprise based on how he'd been pushing, but it feels quite out of character for Bastianini, considering how we praised him in the last podcast for being so smooth and sitting there and forcing Bagnaia into a mistake. But this time, he made his own, and I think that does kind of put a bit of a nail in the coffin of his championship hopes, because I don't see Quartararo or Espargaro doing the same thing. Those two seem to be the top two. And obviously, we've seen how quick Pecco is, so I think we're kind of getting a bit of a story in the season now. I think we're getting our top 3 riders were the 3 guys on the podium today. So, not a great weekend for Bastianini in the end.
No, and I think it all started off by him qualifying 10th. And a day's gone by, you'd say, he's qualified 10th, he'll be P7 by the end of lap 5. And then lap 15, he'll be P6, P5, and then he'll be there for the last 7 laps. And you go, yeah, that's true. But he just looked... I'd say he was just slightly off with the setting and the pace, because he did look like he was over limit in certain parts. And when he crashed, it was just one of those typical Mugello Michelin crashes where it's just rolling the front tire just as you touch throttle, the smallest bit of weight transfer to the rear, and just washed out. Not much you could do about it. Just looked like he was on his limit. Again, maybe that he was in the group, the front tire pressures, a bit of an unknown. It's always really hard to tell from the TV what exactly happened, and usually it's weeks later before you find out exactly what has happened. But I agree, as a satellite rider, you're really not going to win the title. As much as I hate to say it, because the last 2 years now, there's 2 Ducatis who've been ridiculously strong at the start. But I think that is the end. I think it'll be a very good year for him still. I still think he has races that he'll win. He'll have races where he'll be on the podium. But I think he'll have a few more of these races where he'll just end up crashing out of a kind of a safe P7. So I can't really look past the 3 in the championship at the moment. Pecco, Fabio and Aleix, really, they're just too consistent, they're too quick, and they always find their way. That's just the main thing. So I don't really see past them. There's not really anyone. Jack was, I don't know what happened to his race today, but he finished P15.
Yeah, he was woeful in the race. I mean,
he had a bad start, and he didn't get out of Q1. It was just a weird weekend.
Yeah, it wasn't great.
Yeah, so again, just one of those, just every once in a while Jack has that weekend where it's just not him on the bike really. It's just a bit of a weird one. And you think at Mugello he'd have a good one, but just went a bit wayward for him. But Yeah, can't really say much more about Bastianini. He's doing the best he can with his. I think it's this point now where you're kind of getting to the tipping point of the older bike becoming more obsolete to the newer bike. They're getting it dialed in more. Usually doesn't take this long, but I think now we are seeing really the strengths of the GP22 against the 21.
Yeah, I think we are, because obviously that GP21 is quite an old design now, really, because that bike is effectively the GP20, with a couple of
Yeah,
air upgrades on, because of the engine freeze didn't really change much in the bikes between 2020 and 2021. So it's a bit of a old design now. It's getting a bit long in the tooth. But you did just touch on Jack Miller there, so I think it is worth noting that rumour from this weekend sounds like he's pretty much nailed on for a factory KTM seat to replace Miguel Oliveira. So that's quite interesting. The team managers were kind of a little bit, trying to sort of dodge around it, but Guidotti not so much. He was a bit more. He was kind of pretty much confirming. He was a bit more,
yeah.
yeah, just
He's
kind of
very
saying, yeah,
open.
yeah, very very open. Yeah, there you go. That's the word I'm looking for. So it does seem like Jack Miller will no longer be a Ducati rider going into next year. So that could be a good ride for him potentially. I don't know what you think of that, but he could maybe push the development of that bike on a little bit more, especially with being in there with people he knows. Obviously, Aki Ayo's got connections in there. So that's his manager, Guidotti, from Pramac, and I think he knows Pit Byra from something as well. So it's a fair few connections in there.
Yeah, KTM have wanted him for years. It's, again, going back to kind of Joe Roberts and Scott Redding for Aprilia, KTM have been always a big fan of Jack, and I've always wanted him. And it'll be interesting to see because he's a bit of a unique style, so it'll be interesting what he can do on a different bike. And KTM are a bit lost now. The musical chairs have started a long time ago, but currently the way the grid is looking is that Miguel Oliveira is either going to sign for the Tech 3 team, so getting demoted in their team, or signing for the second team for Honda, replacing Alex Marquez. Alex Marquez will lose his seat, so Taka Oyagora would take Taka's seat. Jack then would go over from factory Ducati to the Red Bull seat alongside Brad Binder, and then one of either Bastianini or Jorge Martin would take the second seat at the factory Ducati team. So that's what we're looking at. Guidotti was pretty much saying we're in contact. He wouldn't confirm or deny if they've agreed something, but he was very open with that they have contacted him and they've begun talks, you could say. There was pretty much no resistance to say that there was no contacts. I think it was Chiabatti said that if Jack receives a better offer and he's happy to go, we won't stand in his way.
Yeah,
So
it was Chibata that said that, I think, yeah.
was it Chiabatti? Yeah. So it's pretty much confirmed that Jack and Ducati are parting ways, which is sad, but I'm kind of happy for it. I think something's gone for a bit too long, and like Davi with Ducati, I think Jack's been on so long, and it'll be interesting to see what he can do in a KTM. KTM with Binder did really well in Mugello, but the rest of them were nowhere. Again, Binder showing off how much of a racer he is and what he can do on the opening few laps to make something out of a bad weekend. But again, Jack, he seems to be a pretty good development rider. He was always pretty well, a good reputation in Pramac for being good with development. So he could be very, very valuable to KTM, a team that are really struggling at the minute.
Yeah, I think he could be. Like you say, Binder really flying the flag for them at the minute. He really snuck up at the end. He just kind of appeared at the back of the front group, but I don't think he was quite able to make inroads into it. I think he caught them just a little bit too late. But that's the Italian GP rounded up then. So let's head into the Spanish. Well, it's not the Spanish GPs, it's the Catalan GP, because there's quite a few races in Spain. I'll have a brief look at the predictions for that. So obviously, you'd expect maybe Quartararo to go quite well there. I mean, last year's race winner Oliveira, pretty mad to think that he won that race legitimately in the dry. Obviously, there was old Leathergate last year with Fabio riding around with his leathers open. So, yeah, the Catalan GP could be quite interesting. I'll hand it over to you. Who are you looking out for? Who do you think is going to be quite good?
I can think of 4 riders. I think Fabio would be good there because it's always been a good track for Yamaha. I think Pecco on a roll after winning in Mugello. I think Aleix, he's been there everywhere this year, and I think he had a pole position there in 2016 on a Suzuki. So
Yeah, I believe
he's had history there. as well as Bastianini, because usually when the temperatures go sky high, he's good at managing tyres, so maybe he'll bounce back. So I'll be looking out to that. Maybe Jack Miller too, but again, I would have said Jack Miller for Mugello too, and he was barely in the points. So I'm going to go with them 4. There will be my podium +1, we'll say.
So I'll let you off on that one. I'll let you off the +1 because modern day MotoGP is just that difficult to predict. But I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the MotoGP-Xtra podcast. If you are listening on Spotify, do rate us 5 stars, or if you're on YouTube, do make sure to like the video because it helps us out in both of the algorithms, helps more people find the podcast. So I've been Reese. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and we will see you in the next episode.